All right, guys, so we're now able to at least register a user, get them in the database. However, we want to return a JSON web token once they register so that they can use that token to authenticate and access protected routes. Now, there's a site here, JWT.io, that kind of breaks down what is in a JSON web token, and this is what it looks like. So it's just a bunch of characters here, but it's broken up into three parts, and they color coded it. So the first part, the red part here, it shows you the token type and the algorithm. The algorithm is HS256. It's JWT. The second part is really important, and that's the payload. That's the data that you want to send within the token. And you can see here that they're sending the name of John Doe. There's also an issued at, which is like the timestamp that it's issued at. And then this third part here is the signature. Now, what we want to send as the payload in our case is the ID, the user's ID, so that we can identify which user it is with the token. That way, if we want to, let's say, update our profile, we can easily look at that payload and see which user it is that's logged in and which user's profile we have to update. All right, so the way that this works with the JSON Web Token package that we already installed is we need to first sign it, and we pass in our payload, okay, and then we can have a callback where we send a response back to the client with that token. All right, and then later on, what we need to do is protect our routes by creating a piece of middleware that will verify the token. So if we go down here, we can call jwt.verify with the token that's sent in. It's going to get sent in through the HTTP headers, and we can verify it and then either allow the user to access if it verifies or send back a response that says, token is invalid. So that's how the process works. And if you want to look more into like the algorithms and stuff, you can check out this documentation. So let's head into VS Code, into our user's route. And first thing we're going to do is bring in JSON Web Token. We're going to call this JWT. Set that to require JSON Web Token. All right, and then we want to go down to right after we save the user, and we can get rid of both of these lines here. And we want to create our payload. So I'm actually going to put that into a variable. And our payload is going to be an object with a user, and that user is going to have an ID, and we can get that ID by user.id. Because remember, this user right here is the user that's getting saved, and this will give us a callback, or I'm sorry, this will give us a promise, and we can then get that ID. Now, if you're familiar with MongoDB, you know that it has an underscore ID as the object ID. However, with Mongoose, they use an abstraction, so you can actually use .id. We don't have to do ._ID like that. All right, so we're just going to set that to the ID. All right, now once we have that payload, let's go underneath that, and then we want to do our jwt.sign, and it's going to take in a few things, the payload, and it has to have some kind of secret, okay, JWT secret. Now we don't want to just put that right here. What I'm going to do is put it inside of our config default JSON. So let's go right under the Mongo URI, and let's say JWT secret, and you can set this to whatever you want. I'm just going to say my secret token. All right, so we'll save that. Now, in order to get this, we have to go back to users, and we have to bring in config. So require config. All right, and then back down here in our JWT sign, we want to pass in config. Let's see right here, config.get. And we want to get JWT token, just like we did with the Mongo URI. So I'm just going to save that. Actually, I thought it would format it, so I guess we'll do it ourselves. Let's put these on separate lines. So after the token, we can put in an optional set of options, and we can say expires in. All right, now I want to set this to an hour, which is 3,600 seconds. That's what I want it to be, in production. However, I don't want it to keep expiring when we're testing it out, so I'm just going to add a couple zeros for now. But before I deploy, if I remember, I'll change it back to 3,600. All right, so that's expires, and then after that, we want to put a callback. So I'm going to use an arrow function. All right, now this takes in two things. It takes in a possible error and then the token itself. Okay, so first thing we want to do within here is check for the error. I'm just going to say if error, then let's throw the error. If not, then let's do a res.json, which will give us a 200 response. And then the data we want to send is just the token, like that. And you could send something else. You could send the user ID, but the way that we're building this, it's really not necessary. So we're just going to send that or save that, and that should work. Okay, so just to reiterate, we go through, create the user, hash the password, save the user in the database, get the payload, which includes the user ID, and then we sign the token, pass in the payload, pass in the secret, expiration, which is optional but recommended, and then inside the callback we'll get either an error or we'll get the token. If we get the token or we don't get an error, then we're going to send that token back to the client. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this out. So I'm actually going to delete. I'm going to go into my MongoDB Atlas and just reload this, and I'm actually going to delete. I'll delete the whole user's collection since there's only one in there. And that's one of the great things about MongoDB is you don't have to go and create all your collections and fields and stuff like you would with a relational database. It just works. All right, so let's go back to Postman, and now this shouldn't give us any error that it already exists because we deleted the user. So let's send. Okay, so we get server error here. So it looks like, okay, so configuration property JWT is not defined. So this is actually firing off because for some reason that token is not defined. And I don't know why. Did I not save this? Oh, wait, JWT secret, JWT token. Oh, you guys probably saw that earlier. All right, so this should be secret. All right, so let's try it again. So you saw how that try catch works. We just get server error here. So let's go ahead and try it again. And the user already exists. All right, so what happened was the user registered because it made it this far. However, the token, it didn't have the right secret, so that failed. So let's once again reload this and delete the user. I'll just delete this single user. All right, and I'm not going to re-record stuff like this because it happens. So we'll go back, and now the user's gone, so we'll go ahead and send, and there we go. So the user gets registered, and we get our token. All right, now this token, we haven't set the functionality up yet, but we will be able to take this, send it in the headers and access protected routes. Now, before I go, I just want to show you one thing. If I go ahead and copy this token, and I go back to JWT.io, and I go ahead and paste that in there, you can see exactly what is in this. So you can see the algorithm and type, the signature, but what I want you to look at is the payload. So it gives us this issued at by default, which is the date it's issued at, and then the expiration. Since we included the optional expiration value, this tells us the timestamp that it expires at, and then of course the user, we have the user object which has an ID. Okay, and that ID pertains to the object ID. Let's just reload this right here, and it pertains to this object ID. So 5CB6, blah, blah, blah. You can see it's the same thing. Okay, and you could put other information in here if you want, but for what we're doing, all we need is the ID. All right, so hopefully this gives you an idea of how all this stuff works. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and create the middleware that will verify the token when it's sent back to the server.